Oi, oi, all right, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you. This is Doodle Review coming through with a QDR, quarterly Doodle Review. Yes, the first 3 months of 2025 have already been and gone. And while you might not have seen any reviews on this channel, I've been keeping up. And in this video, we're going to go through the highs and the lows. You might be asking though, well, if you've been keeping up, why haven't we been seeing any bloody reviews? Well, that's because, my friend, the reviews now live on my website in written form. I know, reading, but get into it, mate. It's good for you. My reviews go out weekly as a newsletter every Friday, where I give you my thoughts on like 4 or 5 new albums, tell you which albums coming out that day you should give a fuck about. Plus, my favorite feature, the Doodle Jukebox, where I just hit shuffle on my library and review whatever random track comes on first. Sign up today and I'll send you a print and a private playlist. The link is down there in the description. And if that isn't all, the website is also now serving as like a searchable archive of all 800 plus Doodle reviews. So if you want to know what my thoughts were on AC/DC, or if I've ever said anything about Tribe Called Quest, you literally just like give it a search and see it. All right, let's get back to the task at hand. The highs and lows of music, January to March 2025. Let's get into it. Okay, so finding the worst record is normally like a challenging task for me because I'm just so friggin' nice. But this Young Knives album gave me no choice. I normally try and hold back on hyperbole when I'm saying something negative, particularly when it's in reference to a rock band. As like, you know, a frustrated musician who's toiled away in bands over the years, I have immense respect for anyone that manages to construct an album of material and release it. It's a grind. To treat the output of that hard work with such venom really makes me feel quite guilty. So why do I feel comfortable to so callously throw this Young Knives record into the landfill from which it gets its name? Well, I say worst record with no guilt because this is one of those albums that could quite possibly be someone's best of the entire year. And in 5 or even 10 years' time, I see myself looking back, probably having to reappraise it. It takes a swing so hard, the only outcome that will happen is that you'll be impressed or you'll be pissed off. This album takes its name Landfill, most likely from the brutal label applied to artists like Young Knives that emerged as part of an eruption of UK indie bands between 2005 and 2008. As is the way with the British media, the bands were a shining example of UK creativity until they weren't, and the term indie landfill was then coined. It's not the cause, but it certainly didn't stop the scene from being extinguished. There was a kernel of truth to indie landfill, though. You know, the record labels who knew this might be the last gasp of the 20th century model absolutely flooded the market with bands adorned in Fender Strats, shit haircuts, and Fred Perry polos. However, while there were most definitely some disposable copycats in this era, there was also a lot of originality. Now, I will admit that until now, I wasn't quite aware of how much Young Knives represented that originality. With so many bands to choose from at that time and no streaming and limited budget, I didn't get past the singles of the Leicestershire group. She's Attracted To and Here Comes the Rumour Mill got decent play on MTV2 though, and I had weekends and bleak days through a label sampler for transgressive records that was included in NME. And all of these tracks are brilliant time capsules of the era, but perhaps don't offer many clues as to the more cutting, weird, and very Gang of Four inspired band I would have found had I listened to the first album, Voices of Animals and Men in Full. Subsequent singles from later Young Knives albums like never got as much traction as those early ones. And seeing Landfill listed as an upcoming 2025 release in my weekly searches was the first time I recalled seeing the band's name pretty much since 2008. And that brings us to the album at hand and perhaps my state of mind going into it. With the title Landfill nodding to and perhaps taking ownership of the derogatory label assigned to them and their peers, and my knowledge of only those early singles, I was prepared for like a two fingers up fun indie throwback album. Landfill is most definitely not that. If I had to liken this LP to anything I've heard before, I'd say it reminds me of the dark, murky, apocalyptic, and messy debut album from Julian Casablancas, Voids. Cause and effect is centered around like this crunchy bass drum and vocal sample loop that serves as a backdrop for a spoken word diatribe. Occasional guitar riffs and background vocals like throw down a raggedy rope ladder for the listener, offering some level of access, but it will be hard earned. This nightmarish aesthetic looms over a good portion of the record, particularly No Sound and in the background of the more kind of traditional rockers all the way through. Um, Gone Gone, Completely Gone offers like a nursery rhyme refrain, which appears like a friendly face in a never-ending night terror before like melting beyond recognition as the song goes completely abstract psych freak out. It recalls the batshit jamming you'd hear on like a 70s gong record before just ending. The closest we get to anything resembling the indie scene the Knives are associated with are the tracks Ugly House and Disillusion. The first of those, Ugly House, appears relatively early and its frantic, scratchy guitar groove appears like a welcome sign in the window. But you soon realize this house contains a Penrose staircase that just won't ever end. It's long, even before the extended spoken word jam, and with no sight of a central hook to rally around at all. After a frustratingly long introduction, Disillusion arrives at an angular gang of four groove, which pulls you in as it amps up the tension, offering the closest thing you'll probably get to an actual rock gratification moment on the record. The thing is as I was writing this review, listening to the album, like processing, describing it, I kind of realized how brilliant it is. Love the Knives feels like a short form stage play with great lyrics, hypnotic vocals, and some killer guitars at the end. And The People from the Second Way is a dark minimal mantra with more of those hypnotic vocals. And Your Car Has Arrived is some of the most unsettling chamber pop I've ever heard, with Fresh Meat wrapping it all up in a melancholy, strangely uplifting conclusion. The thing is, the Knives just go so far out of their way to make this whole album uncomfortable, like the long segues between tracks, the tuning up, the musical detours, the sudden ends, all on top of an aesthetic I've already described as a hellish, brittle, gritty, meltingly bad trip. This might actually be one of the best albums I've come across in 2025, but it's utterly sadistic. The best word I can use to describe my experience with this album is anguish. Landfill has gone out of its way to cause me such anguish despite its brilliance that I'm returning the sadistic favor and giving it worst album of the year so far, just to be petty, honestly. Though I do think you should check it out and make your own mind up. When I think about most disappointing albums, it's unfortunately Squid's Cowards that unfortunately comes to mind most obviously. Now, I started out quite iffy on Squid to begin with. Their first album, Bright Green Field, hit at a time when I was going through serious BPFP, British post-punk fatigue. And as such, while I could recognize a band with talent, the music was just a bit too cliched for me. To my surprise, though, I found their second album, O Monolith, a step up in almost every conceivable way. While it felt like the same band with abstract and meandering arrangements, artsy lyrics, and unusual instrumentation, it all just sounded so much more original and interesting. According to the band, Cowards, this latest third record, was written and recorded prior to the release of O Monolith. And that prolificity is obviously impressive, but it also answers like a nagging question that I had the whole week the record was in my rotation, which is why does Cowards feel like a step backwards for this band? And it turns out, what's been sold as this band's LP3 is probably more of an LP 1.5. And as a result, my enjoyment of this record kind of matches that. It sits somewhere between my feelings on their debut and their sophomore release. Like O Monolith, the band demonstrate again that they've grown beyond the post-punk art rock cliches present on Bright Green Field. The lyrical themes feel far more original, and the group's arrangements and instrumental palette are expanded. However, unlike O Monolith, there is just a total lack of thrills or intensity or payoff. Cro-Magnon Man is probably my favorite in the track list because it feels like a holiday from the meandering navel gazing of the rest of the record, and that track feels like like a krautrock jam, kind of like Can. Whereas the rest of the album just bores me to death with its mix of strings and plinky high-end guitars. Definite points for originality on this one, but I'm really missing the grit, thrills, and intensity. So, I've listened several times to Cowards and it's just washed over me, leaving very little behind. The most surprising category was a bit of a challenge for these first 3 months. Some great stuff has come out for sure, and we'll discuss, but not a huge amount has like thrown me for a loop. If I had to pick though, I'd probably give this title to the Boldy James album Permanent Ink. Now, if you're not familiar with Boldy James, he's a rapper out of Detroit with a work ethic that is unparalleled. He released 4 albums last year, and at 3 months into 2025, he's already released another four. I've not got to all of them yet. Of the ones I have, I would actually say Murder During Drug Traffic is the best. It might actually rival his best ever work in general for me, with a mix of great production led by Rich Gaines and features, which is always refreshing on a Boldy album. But I would put Permanent Ink as the most surprising. This is a rare Boldy James album released without a named collaborator, and that's because this record's producer is a relative unknown by the name of Roger Goodman. Partnering with an unknown might irk some fans who are yearning for another, Alchemist link up or dreaming of a Madlib collab. But by working with a newcomer, what surprised me is that Boldy seems to have found some latitude or confidence to try some new things that I think really pay off. Boldy's catalogue suffers from a very strange phenomenon. The rapper's trademark low key delivery, one of his biggest assets, is often his biggest enemy. The lower energy, while cool, can actually sap your energy as a listener over a long player as it gets goes on. And I think you need like well placed guest verses and production to pick that up. Permanent Ink is one of the first times, though, that I've actually heard Boldy trying new flows. And at certain points, he ratchets the energy much higher than his usual demeanor. The title track and Samey both see the rapper adopt a choppier flow. And on Gargoyle Pelt, it feels like he's pushing somehow without diluting his steely sensibility. All of this pays off, and we even get some features here too. Like I say, Murder During Drug Traffic is the better record, but if you've been waiting for Boldy to try something new or step out of his comfort zone a little bit, then Permanent Ink is one to check out. The category I used to call super playable, I've decided to just make it make sense and call most enjoyable. And what I mean by this is that while the album might not be, the best, it might have its flaws, it's one you yourself can find yourself reaching to because it's just easy and it's fun. And I have to say, in these few months, the album that fits this category for me has actually been the Gaga album Mayhem. This album is not without its flaws. There are some really cynical moments of pandering, and for all of the vague sob story this record was sold with on the part of its creator, I found the slow, emotional moments lacking in basically any real depth or substance. That being said, the album has some real bangers that you absolutely can't ignore. Perfect Celebrity is a firm favorite, a great collision of funk, dance, and rock with just a hint of grunge and an absolute belter of a vocal performance in the chorus. The double time synth run at the end of Killer is really cool, and the almost Michael Jackson phrasing on the chorus of Shadow of a Man is just incredibly catchy. The joy in this record, I think, is hearing how Gaga's reference points throughout music history are given the spotlight and on some occasions introduced to and blended with other references. Garden of Eden, for instance, has a post-chorus guitar that feels very Nine Inch Nails meets Prince, while the sexy funk vocal guitar and synth of Killer is 1999 era Prince spliced with the awkward angular phrasing of Scary Monsters era Bowie. It's not without flaws, but skip through the duds, and I think you get a pop album with some big choruses and some actually quite interesting production. The straight up best album of the last few months, it's got to be Dark Side. Dark Side is the collaborative project between avant-garde electronic producer Nicholas Jarre and freeform jazz guitarist Dave Harrington. This is the project's third release, and fittingly for their third album, the duo has expanded into a trio. Joining Jarre and Harrington this time is drummer and percussionist Tlakel Asparza, and while I'm not familiar enough with Dark Side's first albums to make like a comparison, I can say for certain that the rhythms and sonic craft of those rhythms is a component that elevates this collection above any others in this kind of trip hop down tempo hypnagogic world. Combining an abstract electronic composer and a maestro guitar player conceptually, I think, sounds progressive and modern, and it also has the capacity to sound really fucking lame. And I'd point to the track SNC as an example of how those two forms can coexist, deliver on the promise of cool, and sidestep the trappings of lame. At a macro level, is because Dark Side's members follow just like a simple principle that governs most cool music, that it's about feel over chops. Every artist involved here is highly accomplished, and they could likely deliver some of the most technically amazing soundscapes you've ever heard, but that's not what's happening here, and all the better for it. SNC is built around a scratchy guitar riff that feels loose and live. It's backed by a simplistic drum pattern and produced in a way that sounds like a commentary on technicality versus emotion. It's warm, crackly, and flawed. The song is developed and overlaid with in the pocket 70s style clavinets, great sampled vocal cut-ups, and when we eventually get to it, some solid four on the floor beats. From first listen, this song was like an immediate highlight. Across the record, we're carried from those up-tempo groove-based tracks like SNC to smooth contemplative explorations like Heavy is Good for This, all with sonic innovation, but never at the cost of that feel. Dark Side's Nothing is like the gold standard for fusing the synthesized with the organic, making human music at the height of technological capability. In our honorable mentions, I have to, of course, give some love to FKA Twigs and a fantastic Eusexua record. In some ways, this record could be seen as an inversion of Charlie X's Brat. Both artists have stylistically thrown it back to the turn of the millennium, but where Charlie pulled from post-2000s trashy club pop, Twigs here pulls predominantly from underground trance, drum and bass, and trip hop from the 2 or 3 years prior to 2000. Girl Feels Good is my favorite example of that, with synth notes dotted across the stereo spectrum, like a subtle guitar underneath and a slowed down mid-tempo breakbeat. It really feels like Ray of Light era Madonna meets Portishead. The album is by far the most accessible work by FKA Twigs to date, and yet remains layered, deep, and ethereal. Another honorable mention has to be given to The Weeknd and the conclusion to his most recent trilogy of albums. Hurry Up Tomorrow is closer, I think, to After Hours than Dawn FM, in the sense that the album casts like an overall atmosphere and vibe instead of just slapping you in the face with hit after hit after hit. That's not to say there aren't some incredible tunes here. There is just less of a desire to captivate you in a short pop structured 3-minute blast, with Test Fate instead taking you on winding sonic journeys through genre. The first 10 tracks are totally brilliant. The next 6, slightly less impressive, but still great. And I feel like Giorgio Moroder's featuring Big Sleep presents the perfect finale on a silver platter, but it carries on for another 6 tracks. And it's in this last segment I do find the record thematically and musically goes in circles, repeating itself with diminishing returns. I know it probably needed a hit at this point, but the dancehall ballad of Give Me Mercy is a cringe fest. And while a Lana Del Rey feature is always welcome, here she feels wasted. Drive, to be fair, is a high point in this last phase, but the rest just struggles to capture my attention, even though, the creative intention feels really pure. While I am repeatedly checking my watch for the last 30 minutes of this record, I would find it hard to knock it too much because, unlike a lot of modern albums that are overstuffed, Hurry Up Tomorrow is clearly trying to do something. Every track has been included out of love and ambition rather than simply creating more potential streaming minutes. The first half of the record is exceptional, and that makes up for a lot. As I was starting to put this list together, it struck me how I've yet to be blown away by a rock album this year. That was until Ty Segall dropped this on us. Freckle is his new band with Color Green songwriter Corey Madden. With a slight leaning towards the acoustic guitar, Freckle evokes some of the vibes conjured on Segall's Hello High project from a few years back, where that LP, though, bears the hallmarks of being composed in isolation. Having Madden on board for this spiritual sequel expands the horizons of every song. Most songs start with a chord or melodic idea played acoustically, and in many cases, these would be strong enough to constitute their own pleasant solo folk number. But whether it's the emerging classic rock riffing and then breakdown of Patience, the drum break on I Don't Know What I Need, the upbeat pop shift of Taraval, or the weirdo jam of T-Brush Millipede, new landscapes are just constantly coming in and out of focus on the breezy journey that is this album. Heavy is the outlier that pretty much starts as it means to go on, and as the name suggests, is a little crunchier, a little more rocking than anything else on this album. And Siegel's vocals here are reaching for a bombastic 70s vocal style, and it makes it a banger. This is one of my favorite Ty Segall projects, possibly since Freedom's Goblin, and I would highly recommend it if you found yourself becoming a little apathetic to new Segall stuff just due to his like consistent release schedule. This one's one to dive into for sure. All right, that's it. Those were my highlights and lowlights, mainly highlights, I think. This last few months of music were great. There are some ones that I'm still working through that didn't make the cut off. So sadly, Sharon Van Etten, Deaf Heaven, Playboy Carti, Clipping. You'll just have to go over and subscribe to my newsletter, and you'll see them when they drop. And if you do subscribe, I'll send you a print and a playlist. Time to knock it on the head then. If you like this, check out other videos that I've linked in the description. And if you can be asked to do that, then you should stick around, subscribe, share some thoughts, show some love, or just tell some abuse in those comments. And I'll see you in a bit, mate. All right. Cheers. Mine, there you go. Take care. Bye.